Hello and welcome to today's AMA. My name is Robin Leonard. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AFDigital. Today I'm super excited because I have a very special guest, Greg Story. He is the CEO and founder of My Greener Planet, which is an Australian approved carbon credits provider. They do this through solar farms. It's a pleasure to have you on, Greg. How are you today?
Morning, Robin. Very well, thank you.
Fantastic. If you could give the audience a quick introduction about yourself and what My Greener Planet is.
I've been involved in renewable energy for many years. It is an industry which is very close to investment by individuals or companies. It's very much directed towards pension funds and super funds, large-scale infrastructure funds and private equity. And there's almost no opportunity for smaller investors, be they companies or individuals. And I've had a passion for quite a long time to open up that opportunity and enable individuals and companies to become involved in the ownership of solar farms and wind farms so that they can directly participate in the production of carbon credits and the generation of clean green energy, which is exported to the grid.
While you provide carbon credits through solar, it's actually an investment where companies participate in the creation of carbon credits.
As an owner in the solar farm or the wind farm, you own the energy that is generated and you also own the carbon credits which are produced. You become an owner for the life of the solar farm or the wind farm, which is 35 plus years, and every year you are entitled to the energy that's generated and the carbon credits that are produced. So you make a once only payment up front, which we do in companies and individuals to spread out over a number of years to lower the cost, but you become an equity owner in the asset in perpetuity. And each year you are being rewarded with the production of carbon credits which you own, and they can be used to offset your carbon footprint. And each year you own the energy that's generated, which is exported to the grid, and the proceeds of the sale of the energy is paid to you. So over time, the cost of the upfront investment is fully repaid.
Wow, that's an incredible model. How long have you been doing this for, Greg?
We launched My Greener Planet last year, and we have been offering it to companies that we have been dealing with over the years, and it's gone extremely well, and we are now launching it publicly. The companies that have become involved in the past are medium-sized companies and smaller companies and many individuals. We've been very encouraged by that. Companies and businesses see it as an opportunity to get to net zero, and net zero means that your carbon footprint is fully offset, and we help companies measure their carbon footprint, which is made up of the electricity they consume, vehicles that they run, travel, and some companies have gas and diesel usage as well. And we can very quickly calculate for them what their carbon footprint is, and we put that into a calculator which is available on the website, and that tells the company how much they need to spend to buy an investment in the solar farm to provide them with the correct number of carbon credits each year to fully offset their carbon footprint. So we've become a one-stop shop to calculate the carbon footprint, to provide them with the right investment in the solar farm to produce for them the correct number of carbon credits, and they become net zero. That enables the company to promote their products and services as being fully offset or net zero, and that has a great attraction with their customer base, and there's a race amongst many companies to get to net zero so that they can differentiate their products from everybody else as being planet friendly. But it is for most businesses a complex business to get there and a very expensive one. What we've done is enable companies and businesses in a very simple process to calculate your carbon footprint, which we do for them, and then make an investment in the solar farm to produce the correct number of carbon credits to get to net zero. So in one step, they can immediately start promoting their products and services as being carbon neutral. There are not very many smaller businesses and companies that have done that. So if a business or a company is able to achieve net zero, it provides them with a distinct advantage in the market, a distinct point of product differentiation to elevate their products and services above the rest and be carbon net zero and planet friendly.
What are the benefits for companies that invest in becoming net zero?
The primary benefit is the fact that your products and services can be promoted and advertised as being net zero. And that means that you have offset your carbon emissions with carbon credits that you obtain from the solar farm or the wind farm. The solar farms and wind farms have to be accredited by the Australian federal government, and the carbon credits are issued by the Australian federal government. So there is no issues about their provenance or standing in the marketplace. Once you have offset your carbon footprint with those carbon credits that you are producing from your solar farm or wind farm, you are able to advertise the fact that your products and services are net zero. And that is now becoming the hallmark for businesses and companies worldwide. There is a growing demand from the marketplace, from customers, that products and services should be climate friendly, they should be sustainable and reach other standards such as avoiding slave labour and being fully ESG compliant, environmental, social and governance, ESG. And that is the benchmark that is used by large companies and is now being used by smaller companies and businesses.
For us as a small business, I know that our clients, they will have to achieve net zero status if they haven't already. And because of that, they actually need me to be net zero so that I don't add on to their carbon emissions and they don't have to offset on my behalf. So I know that the future of my business is very much dependent on becoming net zero as well. And it may even be an existential crisis. If you don't become net zero certified, you may not be able to operate in the future. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, there's a growing movement around the world, and for that to become the standard. In Europe, there is a lot more compulsion from governments for all companies and businesses to be net zero, and that is growing in other parts of the world, including Australia. It has already happened in Australia. There is categories of large companies that are required to become net zero, and they are now working towards reducing their emissions, but at the same time, the only way that they can offset their final or residual carbon footprint is to buy carbon credits from somebody else. So they are making a payment each month to buy carbon credits from a third party, which is the owner of that solar farm or wind farm. With My Greener Planet, the company becomes the owner of the asset, being the solar farm or the wind farm, which is producing the carbon credits. So you are producing your own carbon credits, not buying from a third party. No longer does becoming net zero require you to pay a cost each month, which goes straight through the P&L as a cost item. With My Greener Planet, you are making an investment into a solar farm. It is yours 35 years or more, and you own the carbon credits that it is producing. As well as that, you own the green energy which is being generated and exported to the grid and paying the solar farm revenue each month. You get that revenue and that repays the cost that you made up front. So over time, the cost is fully repaid.
It's a very circular model, actually. What happens if companies don't invest in carbon neutrality?
Immediately, your products are being relegated to that category that is not planet friendly or compliant with requirements to get to net zero. So you're putting yourself at a disadvantage by not being net zero compliant. It means that other companies that have become net zero are going to be more attractive in the marketplace. And many companies are now requiring products and services to be carbon neutral. For instance, state and federal governments are looking at the products and services that they go to tender for to ensure that they are either net zero or have a plan to become net zero. So if you are not net zero, you are going to exclude yourself from many opportunities to sell your products and services to other companies that are requiring their products and services to be net zero.
What about the consumer buying behavior? Is there any kind of research on, say, customers going in and choosing two products, one of them is net zero, the other one's not?
Yes, there's been a lot of research about that with younger people, millennials and the XY generation. They are very focused and very attuned to the ethical source of their products and services, and they are selecting of their own free will those products which are carbon neutral. So there's no enforcement. It is simply the will of those consumers to make sure that they are doing what they can to be planet friendly, and they are selecting products and services that have a My Greener Planet accreditation sticker or have become net zero in other ways. But My Greener Planet is the only way that you can become net zero at no cost. It allows you to buy an interest in a solar farm or a wind farm, and you are producing your own carbon credit.
What type of companies need to invest in becoming net zero?
There's not too many companies that don't need to. The immediate ones wanting to get to net zero as quickly as possible are those that are selling products and services to the retail market, because it is the retail market where the demand is coming from to buy sustainable, ethical and carbon neutral products and services. Then there is another category of company that is looking to get to net zero who are required to either be net zero or have a plan to be net zero when they are selling in the B2B market to other companies that want to get to net zero, or to governments that have a requirement in their tender processes that they must be sourcing ethically, sustainably and from carbon neutral companies. So there is a movement across the spectrum from both retailers who want to buy ethical and sustainable products, and then secondly from larger organisations and businesses who are compelled by their company requirements to buy ethical, sustainable and carbon neutral products. There is a push from the investment community, from super funds and pension funds that invest in corporations. There is a big push from them for their investee companies to ensure that they are carbon neutral. So the pressure is coming all the way from the top, from the investors to the board, to the general management, to comply with ESG requirements and to ensure that the carbon footprint of the company has been fully offset.
What percentage of companies in Australia would be net zero, and when do you see it becoming main adoption, like where it's 95%? Is that 5 years away? Is that 10 years away?
There's no compulsion except to become net zero, but there is a requirement for certain sections of big companies to become net zero over time, and that requirement is coming from the federal government, and they are becoming net zero now. In the voluntary sectors of industry where it is not compulsory to become net zero, I would estimate that very few are net zero. And there are some, but it would be a small percentage. Consequently, those companies that do become net zero now are going to be in demand by their marketplace, by their consumers, because there is not a lot choose from who can say that their carbon footprint is fully offset and they are net zero. So you are putting yourself at a distinct advantage in terms of product differentiation if you become fully net zero now.
That's actually a really good insight. So if my company becomes net zero now, it will become a USP for me in the market amongst both the consumers but also potentially my business relationships as well.
The demand in companies to become sustainable and fully carbon offset is not just coming from consumers and the buyers of your products and services or from the government in a tender process, but it's coming from staff. Staff are looking for their company to become more sustainable and planet friendly, and they want their company or organisation to comply with the standards around ethical sourcing of products and looking after the planet and becoming net zero. So you are satisfying the demands of staff as well, and they are consumers, and the pressure is coming from them in many instances. So it's a great way to elevate the staff environment and create an environment where you can say as a boss or a company owner that you do care about the environment and you listen to the concerns of the staff, and in doing so you are becoming net zero, satisfying the demands that are coming from staff and the general public, whether they are your consumers or not, but you are putting your products and services in a special category of compliance, and they are being sought out by consumers who are looking for ethical, sustainable and carbon neutral products and services.
If you have B2C customers, maybe the child in the household that's telling the parents to buy a brand because it's sustainable. If you've got B2B relationships, larger companies may have government legislation forcing them to be net zero, and they will push that onto you or prefer other partners that are net zero. And you also have your own employees. If you just want to have a good workplace and have good employee retention and acquisition, you need to be net zero because they also care about it. All of the humans surrounding every business is going to eventually force it, if not legislation directly.
Companies and businesses who have used My Greener Planet to become net zero, in every single case, they have reported to us that their products and services have increased sales. They've had to increase production or offerings of their services. In every single case, they have experienced an increase of sales and an increase in profits. It proves that in the B2B and the B2C market, there is a strong demand for products that are ethical, sustainable, and carbon neutral or net zero. The cost of paying to become net zero, in the first instance, it is fully repaid by the money that you make as an owner of the solar farm from selling the energy that's generated to the grid, but as well as that, you are going to sell more products and services and grow the bottom line.
It's a very interesting model and it's very compelling. What is a carbon credit?
A carbon credit is an instrument. The general size of a carbon credit is 1 tonne of CO2 emissions, and CO2 emissions are generated by using electricity or burning petrol or diesel or flying in an airplane or driving a motor vehicle or from using gas in the manufacture of products and services. So it is an instrument which offsets your generation of carbon emissions. It's not a standard instrument worldwide, unfortunately. Consequently, there are carbon credits which are produced all around the world which have dubious provenance, which means that they don't necessarily represent the saving of CO2 emissions. So a carbon credit comes about by a project which is reducing or taking CO2 emissions from the atmosphere. So solar farms and wind farms don't produce any carbon emissions like a coal-fired power station does. So the energy that is generated from solar farms and wind farms is reducing the amount of energy which is required from a coal-fired power station. So it is reducing the CO2 which is being emitted by that coal-fired power station. The forestry project is absorbing, the growing of trees is absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. And every unit of energy which is produced by a solar farm or a wind farm receives a carbon credit. And as trees grow and absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, they receive a carbon credit. The carbon credits that we have in our solar farms and wind farms are issued by the Australian federal government. The other issue about carbon credits worldwide is that there is no one single body which is issuing carbon credits or authorising their validity. There are many organisations around the world that are accrediting projects and issuing carbon credits, and many of them have dubious provenance. So it is a major issue for companies to make sure that they are not doing what has become known as greenwashing and buying carbon credits which come from dubious sources and are not entirely genuine and using those to offset their carbon. So we avoid all those questions of validity and provenance by enabling our customers to buy into solar farms and wind farms which have been accredited by the Australian federal government, and the carbon credits are not issued by us or a third party. They are issued by the Australian federal government.
Be very careful where you're buying your carbon credits from and ensuring the validity of them. There is a government approval process so that as long as it's been approved, then it's legitimate. Are there two major types of carbon credit providers or sources?
No, in Australia, the carbon credits are a single unit. They're called an Australian Carbon Credit Unit, and they are issued by the saving of CO2 emissions or the absorption of CO2 from the atmosphere by a forest. And there are carbon credits which are issued in relation to solar farms and wind farms and other renewable energy projects, and both are issued by the Australian federal government. They both relate to 1 tonne of CO2 emissions. Around the world, there are many different types of carbon credits. Some are quite legitimate, but many others are not. They generally all relate to 1 tonne of CO2, but they are issued by different bodies and organisations, many of which are private. They're not government ordained or government owned. In Australia, there are other organisations which are issuing carbon credits, but in relation to our solar farms and wind farms, all the carbon credits are issued by the Australian federal government.
How much does a carbon credit cost?
Australian carbon credits are traded on a market and their price fluctuates daily. They range from $30 to $60. There are 2 different types of carbon credits in Australia which are approved by the Australian federal government. One comes from Renewable Energy and they are trading at about $60, and the other one, the Australian Carbon Credit Unit, comes from Forestry and Agriculture and carbon farming, and they are closer to $30. Around the world, there are other carbon credits which are trading at about $15, and some are even less than that. But they are the ones which have dubious provenance. The reason why they are cheap is because their provenance is not recognised by governments and major companies. So when larger companies are being audited for their ESG compliance, their environmental, social and governance compliance, many of them who have purchased these cheaper carbon credits are failing the test, and they are now being forced to move from those carbon credits which were cheaper and came from dubious sources to buy carbon credits which have been authorised by the government bodies around the world, and there is a few private organisations that are accrediting carbon credits as well. But the readily accepted carbon credits, which are accepted by governments, are trading at a higher price, and that is why it becomes even more compelling to look at the most cost-effective way to buy those carbon credits. So rather than paying for the carbon credits, we are enabling companies to buy into the solar farm which is producing them. So over time, you are fully repaid. My Greener Planet is offering the most cost-effective manner in which to buy carbon credits.
When I first started studying sustainability, one of the first projects they recommend is to do solar on your buildings as an organization. Within 1 to 2 years, there's ROI because you save the energy that you would have otherwise spent. It's one of the first things that all companies should do is actually set up solar panels if they have buildings. My organization, we don't have a building that I can put a solar panel on. What you're actually doing is providing a service where I can effectively generate my own power, cancel out my consumption of non-green energy by creating green energy. So you're actually facilitating that investment in solar in the same way that a larger company with a lot of buildings, they may put solar on top of those buildings. You're providing that for everybody.
There's 2 steps that every business and company should go through in assessing and reducing their carbon footprint. To reduce your carbon footprint requires you to reduce your consumption of electricity and gas and diesel and motor cars and plane travel. Most medium-sized and large companies have for many years now been going through a major energy reduction to reduce their use of energy. And we all know the stories about companies simply changing their light bulbs and reducing their consumption of energy significantly just by that. There are many other ways to reduce your energy consumption by looking at the processes in your manufacturing and cooling and heating and how much gas you use. And that is an ongoing process that companies have performed. And then there is the other aspect of reducing your carbon emissions by producing your own energy. And so every every company should look at using solar panels on the roof. Unfortunately, it is not a practice that many companies or organizations can do, because they may be renting the space, they're leasing a factory or office space, and therefore they don't own the roof space and not able to use it. And even if they were, it is not going to produce enough electricity for the business. They are still going to have to use electricity from the grid. And all that electricity coming from the grid, the great majority of it, is still produced by gas-fired production and coal. There is a growing amount of renewable energy from solar and wind in the grid, but the majority is still coming from fossil fuel. The only way to offset that is to buy into a solar farm or a wind farm. So instead of putting panels on your roof, you're in effect buying into solar panels in a solar farm, and that is achieving the same result for you. That energy is going into the grid, it's offsetting what you're using in the office or the factory, so it's an alternative to putting solar panels on your roof, and it is a cheaper alternative. You're buying into that solar farm at cost price. There is no premium, and it is cheaper because it's on a larger scale. You have the economies of scale than putting solar panels on your roof.
Exactly.
And when you put solar panels on your roof, they are not as efficient as putting solar panels on a large solar farm, which is engineered to maximize energy generation. It's oriented in the correct way for the sun. It's away from trees. It's out in an open space where there is good irradiation levels. It is going to produce a lot more energy than the solar panels on the rooftop. It is a much better alternative than putting solar panels on your roof anyway.
How do companies buy carbon credits?
There are many opportunities to buy carbon credits. There are many brokers and commission agents who are selling carbon credits. When you go to those agencies and brokers, they are selling somebody else's carbon credits, or in some cases they are selling their own carbon credits. But when you buy a carbon credit, you are buying a paper instrument. You are not buying equity interest in the solar farm or the wind farm or the forestry project which is producing the carbon credits. You are putting money into somebody else's back pocket. It is a cost item in your P&L. You don't own the asset. And every month, every year, you have to buy more. With My Greener Planet, you are not buying somebody else's carbon credit. You are buying into the asset which is producing the carbon credit. It is your carbon credit. And you receive that carbon credit every month, every year, for the life of the solar farm or the wind farm, which is 35 plus years. So there is no end of opportunities to buy carbon credits in the open market. There are trading markets all around the world which are becoming larger and larger. More and more investment banks and organisations are getting into the industry, and there are now investment funds in Australia and around the world which are enabling the people and super funds to invest in carbon credits. So they are either funds or ETFs which are buying carbon credit and trading on an increase in price on those ETFs. So it's the same as buying stocks and shares. You're buying carbon credits because there is a expectation around the world that the price of carbon credit is going to increase, and that has been happening over the last 10 years. Cost of carbon credits has indeed increased, and the future price of carbon credits on the futures market is in an upward trend. What you are doing when you are buying into your own solar farm or wind farm through My Greener Planet is you are taking out a hedge against those rising prices. You're making a once-only payment today at today's prices to buy an equity interest in a solar farm or wind farm, which will forever produce carbon credits. You don't pay again. And so as the price of carbon credits increases, that is enabling you to lock in your price of carbon credits today and not pay that increase. So you're hedging against the rising price. In addition, as the cost of energy increases, the revenue flowing to the solar farm or wind farm from the sale of the energy to the grid is increasing, and that increase in revenue goes straight to you. So that is also acting as a hedge against a rising price. Over the last 6 to 9 months, the cost of electricity and gas in Australia has increased significantly, and businesses and individuals are wearing the pain of that. But if you had bought bought into a solar farm or wind farm at the beginning of the year, you would not incur those increases because your revenue that you're receiving will offset it. So even today, it is very cost effective to buy into your own generation of electricity to hedge against a rising price.
I wasn't aware that there was a stock market around carbon credits, and even just the risk of the increasing price over time. If you're regularly paying for carbon credits as an expense, then that expense is going to keep going up unless you get into the generation game. How do you get the green sustainability tick or the net zero accreditation?
What we do is offer a one-stop shop at My Greener Planet where we will work with you to measure your residual carbon footprint. Businesses and companies have already done everything they can to reduce their consumption of energy, whether it's in the form of electricity or diesel or gas. They have done everything they can to reduce that, but every company and every business is left with a residual carbon footprint. No matter how much efficiency measures you have, you're still absorbing electricity and diesel and gas. So you still have a residual carbon footprint. We will work with you to measure that, and if it's a small business, that's a very simple exercise because it's mainly comprising electricity, and we can see from your electricity bill what your usage is and what your carbon footprint is. But we can work with you to calculate your carbon footprint. We can then advise you how much you need to invest in a solar farm or wind farm so that you are producing the correct number of carbon credits to offset that carbon footprint. And then you make a once only payment to buy an interest in the solar farm to produce that number of carbon credits. You get the same number of carbon credits every year to offset your carbon footprint. If your carbon footprint increases, you can buy more of the solar farm or wind farm to produce more carbon credits. On the other hand, if your carbon footprint reduces, you can sell your interest in the solar farm. There is a ready market for other people and ourselves who will buy back from you your interest in the solar farm or wind farm. So you are not locked in for 35 years if you don't want to be. There's a ready market out there which we have created to sell your interest in the solar farm or wind farm.
Is there any other final advice you'd like to give the audience?
The customers that we have, which range from very large companies to middle order companies and to SMEs, every one of them has experienced an increase in sales as a result of working with My Greener Planet to buy an interest in a solar farm and to obtain the carbon credits to offset your carbon footprint. In all cases, they are using the accreditation from My Greener Planet because we have worked with them to calculate their residual carbon footprint and to offset it, so we can provide them with a My Greener Planet accreditation which they can use in their marketing material and alongside their company logos and websites. And in every case there has been an increase in sales, an increase in profit and an increase to the bottom line. Many of our customers have come back to increase their investment. They come in on a trial basis and just buy a small amount of the solar farm, not to fully offset their carbon credit, to see whether this does impact their marketing ability and sales, and all those companies have come back to increase their involvement with My Greener Planet. There is a lot of information on our website, mygreenerplanet.com, and there is a link there for emails and telephones, and we're very happy to talk to any businesses or companies about how they can get to net zero, advertise their products as being carbon neutral and increase their sales and profitability.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been really informative. Like and subscribe for more information.